It's with a heavy heart that I rise to inform members of my resignation as Speaker of the House of Commons. It has been my greatest honour as a parliamentarian to have been elected by you, my peers, to serve as the Speaker of the House of Commons for the 43rd and 44th Parliament. I have acted as your humble servant of this House, carrying out the important responsibilities of this position to the very best of my abilities. Je tiens à vous remercier.
I would like to thank you, my colleagues, for your support and for your collegiality during my term as Speaker.
This House is above any of us. Therefore, I must step down as your Speaker. I reiterate my profound regret for my error in recognizing an individual in the House during the joint address to Parliament of President Zelensky. That public recognition has caused pain to individuals and communities, including the Jewish community in Canada and around the world, in addition to survivors of Nazi atrocities in Poland, among other nations. I accept full responsibility for my actions. My resignation is effective at the end of the sitting day tomorrow, Wednesday, September 27th, to allow preparations for the election of a new Speaker. Until that time, the Deputy Speakers will chair the House proceedings. Thank you. Merci.
You know, I did a ton of media on this in the past 24 hours. I'm doing more tonight in Canada, but also in the United States, where they see Trudeau more clearly than we see him because their journalists are not on Trudeau's payroll. I don't know if you saw this, but I saw this morning in Blacklocks. That's one of the few independent media companies left in Ottawa. The story's called Admit Media Subsidies Failed. Let me read the headline. Subsidies will not save money losing news media, says a Department of Heritage memo. But I actually think that misses the point. The bailout was never intended to fix the industry. How could it? It's like programs for the poor or the homeless aren't actually intended to stop them from being poor or homeless. Then those social workers would be out of a job. The media bailout was intended to rent reporters in perpetuity, and more importantly, rent their editors and their publishers. And in that way, it was designed perfectly, a renewable grant that has to be begged for every year by journalists to keep newspapers and TV stations on their toes, to keep them hungry, to keep them dependent on Trudeau. Of course, they don't want to save the industry. That would be a disaster for Trudeau to have a healthy, independent news media again. It is very much working as planned, keeping the media dependent on Trudeau so they cover him with butterfly kisses. That's why the toughest coverage of this news has, as always, been foreign news media who are not on Trudeau's payroll. Speaking of which, here's a cabinet minister from Poland, where the Nazi SS was particularly brutal, including the particular Nazi battalion that was celebrated in Parliament on Friday. Poland says they want to extradite Trudeau's war hero, Yaroslav Hunka, for war crimes. Now, Hunka's 98. There is no statute of limitations on criminal trials, but I don't actually know if Poland means to go through with it. But at the very least, this is their way of saying they're grossed out by Trudeau and this embarrassing embrace of that Nazi. But also the fact that that Nazi and many more have lived in Canada for 70 years with no prosecutions. As Joe Warmington pointed out in the Toronto Sun, there's actually a war memorial to those Nazi soldiers in Oakville, Ontario. Literally a war memorial for the Nazi SS. That's up and proud, whereas the statue of Sir John A. Macdonald is covered up in Toronto. So yeah, go Poland. Now, Rota, the Speaker, is gone. I think the bailout media will move on as fast as they possibly can. They'll try to move our attention to something new. Who knows? Maybe with another scandal. I mean, it was just a week ago that Trudeau was starting a diplomatic war against India, the world's largest democracy. Trudeau's cabinet was musing that the Indian government actually wanted to assassinate Trudeau by sabotaging his plane. Listen carefully to this.
Sabotage has been ruled out in the technical issue in Canada's plane on its trip to India. I'm not going to comment on that. There are obviously ongoing concerns. I'm also focused on replacing those planes because we've already made that step.
But you're not commenting on if there's any potential sabotage that left the plane on that runway.
I don't want to. I've got to run off to something, but I want to.
So give Trudeau credit. People have stopped talking about the India fiasco to start talking about the Nazi fiasco. He just needs a third fiasco to change the channel again. And he lost his number one weapon, calling other people Nazis. He can't really do that anymore, can he? Well, of course, he'll try to, and the CBC will be there to help him. But I was asked a question this morning by a Quebec radio station about this, which was, who knew? Did anyone really know about Yaroslav Hunka? I mean, was it really just a big misunderstanding, as Trudeau and his friends say? Was it really a secret between the Speaker, Anthony Rota, whoever wrote his carefully worded speech, and the Nazi himself, that no one else knew? Is that true? I thought about it, and here's what I said on the Quebec radio station this morning. I said that Chrystia Freeland must have known. I mean, she speaks Ukrainian fluently. It was actually her first language, she says. She has a home in Ukraine to this day. She visits there frequently. She's very active in the Ukrainian community here in Canada, and she would know very deeply all about Ukrainian nationalists and the Waffen-SS Nazis and those Ukrainians who positively joined the Nazis when they invaded Ukraine and collaborated with them. She would know that because her grandfather was one of them. Her grandfather was a full-blown Nazi. He expropriated a newspaper that had been owned by a Jew, and he turned it into a pro-Nazi propaganda mill. That was Chrystia Freeland's grandpa. And she tried to cover it up for years. I'm not saying she's a Nazi. I'm not saying that. But she knows all about them. She would have 100% known who this mystery war vet was. You say to her, here's a war hero from Ukraine who in the 1940s fought against the Russians, and she would have known exactly who you meant. You can see, look at that, the pure ecstatic joy on her face as Hunka was given the round of applause, a 98-year-old man that surely made Freeland think of her own Nazi grandfather. How could she not? But here's my point, and here's what I said on the radio. Freeland and Trudeau have been going harder and harder and harder in recent months. I'm not talking about being anti-Russia. I'm not talking about the $9 billion Trudeau has given from Canadian taxpayers to Ukraine without so much as a vote in the House of Commons, let alone a real debate. I'm not talking about the ethnopolitics here, about how Trudeau in the past 2 weeks has had two scandals, both of which are tied to his attempts to politically capitalize on foreign affairs battles here in Canada, Sikhs and India, and Ukraine and Russia. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about Trudeau's growing comfort level, guided by Chrystia Freeland, the Nazi's granddaughter, a comfort level with becoming more and more radical. Trudeau has been radicalized. I'm not talking about supporting Ukraine against Russia or sending money over there. I'm not calling that the radicalization. I'm talking about Trudeau taking increasingly a strident tone and substance and connecting with radicals so that honoring someone like Hunka, which would have been unthinkable a few years ago, well, it's not so much of a stretch for him anymore.